Limitless Living presents a story they never taught you in school. When slavery is mentioned, the world looks west, to ships, plantations, and Europe. But long before the Atlantic was crossed, Africa was already bleeding. This is the history buried under silence, the story of Arab expansion, invasion, and the enslavement of Africa, a system that lasted for over 1,300 years. This is not propaganda. This is memory. This is the forgotten chain. In the 7th century, a new power rose from the Arabian Peninsula. By 632 CE, after the death of the Prophet Muhammad, Arab armies began an era of rapid expansion. Their sights turned to the rich lands of North Africa. In 642 CE, Egypt was invaded. By the late 600s, Libya and Tunisia fell, and by the early 700s, Algeria and Morocco were under their control. North Africa, once a mosaic of cultures, was now under Arab Islamic rule. With conquest came control, and with control came captives. The people of Africa who had lived on this land for millennia found themselves in a new world order. War prisoners became property. Their continent became a corridor for trade that would last for centuries. Across the vast Sahara Desert, caravans moved in a deafening silence. From West and Central Africa, from regions we now know as Mali, Niger, Chad, and Sudan, millions of men, women, and children were forced on a brutal journey northward. They were marched into Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, and Egypt. This was the trans-Saharan slave trade. Imagine men chained together, walking barefoot across burning sands. Imagine women captured and sold into domestic and sexual slavery, their futures stolen. Imagine children stripped of their names, their families, their entire worlds. The great cities of North Africa, Cairo, Tripoli, Marrakesh, and Algiers became notorious slave markets, bustling with human trade. This system, which began in the 7th century, was a dark artery running through the continent, and it survived well into the 1800s, a millennium of unbroken suffering. While the desert swallowed lives, the East African coast became another deep wound. Starting from the 9th century, Arab and Swahili traders dominated the coastal regions of Somalia, Kenya, Tanzania, and Mozambique, and reached deep into Ethiopia and Sudan. At the very center of this trade stood the island of Zanzibar. Africans were captured far inland, in raids that tore villages apart. They were forced on death march to the coast, with only the strongest surviving the brutal trek. From the ports they were packed onto ships and sent across the Indian Ocean and the Red Sea. Their destinations were Arabia, Persia, modern-day Iran, and the Gulf states. Zanzibar itself became one of the world's largest and most infamous slave hubs by the 18th and 19th centuries. The beautiful island's wealth was built on an unimaginable scale of human misery. Slavery was only officially ended there in 1897, a lifetime after it was abolished in many Western nations. This system of enslavement was not an abstract force. It had names and faces. The slave masters were Arab merchants, Swahili elites, and even local African collaborators who participated in the raids and trade. Ottoman officials and the rulers of sultanates and empires all profited from this human trafficking. The enslaved were used for every imaginable purpose. They were domestic laborers, soldiers in foreign armies, and workers on vast agricultural plantations. A particularly cruel fate was reserved for many of the men, who were castrated to serve as eunuchs in wealthy households and courts. Thousands never survived this brutal procedure. Women were often forced into concubinage, their bodies treated as property. While laws and religious texts sometimes spoke of limits and humane treatment, the raw power of the slave masters almost always ignored them. For the enslaved, there was no justice, only survival. The sheer scale of this trade is difficult to comprehend. Historians estimate that between 10 and 18 million Africans were enslaved and transported through these Arab-Islamic routes, a period stretching from around 650 CE to the 1900s. To put that into perspective, that's over 13 centuries of continuous human trafficking. Entire regions were depopulated, their communities erased from history. Generations were lost and bloodlines ended forever. A haunting question often arises. Why are there no large, visible black populations in much of the Middle East today, unlike in the Americas? The brutal answer is that survival was never the plan. The high death rates, the practice of castration, and the assimilation of children born to enslaved women meant that these African communities were not meant to last. Erasure was the final outcome. The abolition of slavery in the Arab world came remarkably late, and it was often driven by external pressure rather than internal compassion. In 1846, Tunisia became one of the first to officially abolish the practice. But elsewhere, the change was slow. Egypt only followed in 1895, Zanzibar, the great slave port, in 1897. Shockingly, in Saudi Arabia and Yemen, slavery remained legal until 1962, and in Mauritania, it was only officially outlawed in 1981, with enforcement remaining a challenge even today. For many, the chains were simply renamed, not removed. The legacy of this system continues to echo in modern-day prejudices and social hierarchies. The end of legal slavery was not the end of the story. Limitless living does not tell comfortable stories. We tell complete ones. The world knows that Europe enslaved Africa, and that chapter of history must never be forgotten. But it is not the only chapter. Arab empires also enslaved Africa on a massive scale for over 1,000 years. Acknowledging this truth is not about creating division. Truth is about liberation. It is about giving a voice to the voiceless millions who suffered in silence. Africa cannot fully heal from a history it is forbidden to remember. We must have the courage to face all of our past, no matter how painful, because only then can we build a limitless future. Africa was hunted. Africa was broken. Yet Africa endured. This is limitless living. Where truth has no chains, follow us for more untold history.